Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Wednesday, November 7th.
I don't know why you'd say that. It's such a racist
there
question.
Are some people that say that now
A tense news conference with the president and a new head of the Justice Department after the resignation of Jeff Sessions. A report from the PBS NewsHour's Yamiche Alcindor.
Do is get to work on a budget. We've got to make sure that we're establishing the priorities for the state. You know, a budget is a moral document.
Governor-elect J.B. Pritzker talks with Amanda Vinicky about his priorities for Illinois.
When our congressman broke that promise, we came together because we deserve better.
32-year-old Lauren Underwood and another political newcomer, businessman Sean Casten, beat congressional Republicans in 2 suburban districts.
I think people like me. I think people like the job I'm doing.
Democrats take control of the House, but President Trump claims a great victory and renews his attacks on the press. We analyze the elections.
I think it's up to the voters to decide who's the right candidates and who has the right ideas.
With her re-election as Illinois Comptroller secured, will Susana Mendoza run for mayor?
In this election, the Democratic Party decided that we would try to ratchet up turnout in those areas.
And meet some of the Cook County Democrats who rode the Illinois blue wave to unseat Republican incumbents on the county board last night. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Ponce. For a brief time, Mayor Rahm Emanuel will have an ally in the governor's office. Eddie Aruza has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Eddie.
Phil, the mayor's personal and political relationship with now lame duck Governor Bruce Rauner took a sharp nosedive over the last few years, but yesterday's election outcome has given the mayor something to look forward to. After Governor-elect J.B. Pritzker takes office in January, Emanuel says he's ready to work with him on an ambitious agenda that he hopes comes to fruition before the mayor leaves office in May. Among the items on the mayor's wish list are new funds to pay for universal full-day pre-K and money for a list of long-delayed CTA and Metro projects.
It's been a decade since they've had a transportation bill. It's been 30 years since they've come up with additional resources for it. And I have been a proponent and will continue to push for early on for a major investment in transportation dollars, given the strength from roads, runways, and rails that transportation plays not only in Chicago but Illinois' economy.
On other topics, the mayor characterized the results of yesterday's election as a rejection by voters of President Trump. Emanuel also conceded that Amazon's HQ2 is unlikely to land in Chicago, and he refused to chime in on the large field of mayoral candidates, including the possibility that newly re-elected Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza might join that crowded field as early as this week. Well, one of the big winners in the statewide races last night returned today to his old stomping grounds in Chicago's Hyde Park neighborhood to thank supporters. Illinois Attorney General-elect Kwame Raoul was able to hold back a challenge from Republican Erica Harold, winning by more than 10 percentage points. The Republican candidate tried to portray Raoul as beholden to Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, who contributed $1 million to Raoul late in the campaign. But the Attorney General-elect says he will remain independent from the Democratic Party boss.
Because of the Speaker's support late in the race, people were trying to characterize me as a machine politician, and as we know, those who come out of the Hyde Park community come with an independent streak to them, and I continue to hold that.
Raoul takes office January 14th, replacing the other Madigan, Lisa, who has served as Illinois Attorney General for nearly 16 years. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson is now asking the police board to fire Officer Robert Rialmo. Rialmo, seen here shirtless in a bar altercation earlier this year, shot and killed Betty Jones and Quintonio LeGrier in December 2015. Rialmo and his partner were responding to a call on the city's west side when Rialmo maintains the 19-year-old LeGrier charged at him with a baseball bat. Last December, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability recommended Rialmo be fired, but the superintendent objected, saying the shooting was justified. Johnson has now reversed course after the full police board said it would take up the matter. Separately, the city settled a $16 million lawsuit with the family of Betty Jones, who was accidentally killed when Rialmo opened fire. As for the weather, partly cloudy overnight with temperatures dipping below freezing, a low around 31. Tomorrow, not much of a warm-up, mostly cloudy with a high of 39 degrees. And if you haven't heard, Chicago Tonight is streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also watch us via podcast and the PBS video app. And now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Eddie. The results of the midterm elections may have surprised some, but what surprised many, news today of U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions' resignation. Sessions' resignation, asked for by the president, was announced after a long press conference early this afternoon at the White House. Joining us to talk about that resignation and more is PBS NewsHour White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who joins us from outside the White House. And Yamiche, was the resignation of the Attorney General a surprise?
The resignation of Jeff Sessions wasn't really a surprise because for months the president had been saying publicly on Twitter and in interviews that he was not happy with the way that Jeff Sessions was handling the Department of Justice. He was mainly upset that Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation, even though Jeff Sessions, of course, carried out hardline immigration policies, also was very supportive of the law enforcement community. But President Trump blamed him for the Russia investigation and the special counsel being appointed. And as a result, this wasn't very surprising. The timing of it was a bit surprising because the president had a very long press conference where he could have announced that Jeff Sessions had been fired, and he didn't, and we learned afterwards.
The prospect of other cabinet changes?
The president says that he likely will have several changes. He didn't say exactly who. There's word that General John Kelly, who of course is the chief of staff to the president, that he might be leaving. There's some talk that White House press secretary Sarah Sanders might be leaving. But right now, Jeff Sessions is the only person who's confirmed to be leaving. But White House aides have been telling me that it's pretty normal for after a midterm election for people to leave and for there to be a staff shakeup. The president said today that sometimes people come in young and then they get old once they do this job because it's so exhausting, which is also partly true.
The Jeff Sessions has been replaced by acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. What can you tell us about Matthew Whitaker?
Well, Matthew Whitaker is originally from Iowa. He's someone who was confirmed by the Senate to be the chief of staff to the Attorney General. He also wrote an interesting article where he wrote that the Mueller investigation had gone too far. So you have an acting attorney general who is essentially hostile to the Mueller investigation, which is not good news for Robert Mueller. That's pretty much what we know about him right now.
The president had a long press conference today, as we mentioned. What were his comments about the election itself?
Well, the president was really taking a victory lap. He was feeling very good about the election. He also was calling out Republicans by name who didn't want him to campaign with them and saying, you lost because you didn't embrace me. He was talking about Carlos Curbelo. He was talking about Mia Love. And then he said, for the places that I did show up in a race like Ron DeSantis in Florida, I was the difference maker. My body, I was the only person who could really bring these people home, and I did it. And he also compared himself to Oprah and Obama and celebrities and said, look, all I had was me, and I went out to all these states and Republicans were able to gain seats in the Senate, and that means that my message and my very presence is a good thing for Republicans.
The president continues to have heated exchanges with reporters in the White House press corps. How would you assess the state of relations between the White House and the press corps right now?
I think things are very tense. During the press conference, the president had several exchanges with reporters. Jim Acosta of CNN, he called him rude. Peter Alexander of NBC, he said that he was also someone who was grandstanding. April Ryan, who was a radio reporter and also someone who appears on CNN, he said that she needed to sit down when she was asking about voter suppression. And of course, I had my own exchange with the president when I asked him, when I posed the question whether or not he felt like he was emboldening white nationalists by calling himself a nationalist, and he took that very to heart and said that that was a racist question and that I really should not have answered. I should have not posed that question. He said it was offensive. So at one point, the president was even pacing, literally pacing at the podium because he was so angry at reporters.
Let's take a look at that exchange between you and President Trump.
on the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists. Now people are also
I don't
saying
know why you'd
that
say
the
that.
president.
That's such a racist
There
question.
are some people that say that now the Republican Party is seen as supporting white nationalists
Oh, I
because
don't
of your
believe
rhetoric.
that. I don't
What do
believe
you make
that.
of that?
I don't believe it. Well, I don't know. Why do I have my highest poll numbers ever with African Americans? Why do I have among the highest poll numbers with African Americans? That's such a racist question. Honestly, I mean, I know you have it written down and you're going to tell me. Let me tell you, it's a racist question. I love our country. I do. You have nationalists, you have globalists. I also love the world, and I don't mind helping the world, but we have to straighten out our country first.
What is the takeaway from that exchange, Yamiche?
I think the takeaway is that the president is really angered at the idea that he would be emboldening white nationalists, and he doesn't like being questioned about whether or not his rhetoric is really increasing the culture of violence. There's an increase of hate crimes all across the country, and the president doesn't want to be blamed for that. So I think as I was posing my question, he was really just upset at the fact that I was even suggesting that critics could think that he was a racist. So I think that there was a lot of that going on. I also think that he was really upset at the whole atmosphere because, like I said, the press conference was a very tense exchange between reporters. So I think he was a little bit angry about other reporters. And when I posed my question, you saw what happened.
You posed another question to the president. What was the topic of that?
Well, after the president talked about my question being racist, of course, journalists do what they always do, which is press on and ask more questions. So I asked a question about middle-class tax cuts and whether or not the president thought he could work with Democrats in the House to get that passed. And he said that he wasn't sure that I should ask Democrats whether or not they'd be willing to work with him. Of course, it's important to note that the president said if Democrats investigate him, either his tax returns or whether or not he can hire his children to work at the White House, that he will not want to work with Democrats. So that's a really problematic exchange there, because the president's saying that he won't work with Democrats if they look into his finances.
Yamiche Alcindor, thank you so much for helping us out, giving us some insights. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Illinois will be getting a new governor following Democratic J.B. Pritzker's resounding victory over incumbent Governor Bruce Rauner last night. Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicky sat down with Pritzker and running mate Juliana Stratton this afternoon, and Amanda is here now with some highlights. What do they have to say, Amanda?
Well, Phil, Pritzker is going to be taking from actually President Trump the title of the wealthiest elected official in the United States. But not yet. Pritzker has a couple of months to prepare, but there's no rest for the weary. He spent part of the day greeting voters at CTA train stops, also talking with reporters. Pritzker says his first order of business, his top priority, a budget. A solution that he's often talked about is moving Illinois' flat income tax to a graduated one, in which there's a sliding scale of tax rates based on how much money you make. But that requires amending the Constitution, so it will take time. During the primary, Pritzker talked about an interim solution. Here's a clip of that from February. What about until that time? How would you help Jakia here?
So we can do what other states have done with a flat income tax, and that is to put exemptions in place to raise the overall rate, but protect the middle class and those striving to get there with those exemptions, and then increase the earned income tax credit. That has the effect of a progressive income tax, but frankly, it's very temporary. So that's why we've got to go after immediately, and I have put a plan forward for doing that, go after immediately getting a constitutional amendment in place, which we can get by 2021.
But now he says that interim solution is not on the table.
That's not something I'm looking at currently. I am looking, though, at things like, as you know, I've favored legalizing recreational cannabis. I think that'll bring in $700 million to $1 billion possibly of revenue to the state. It gives us an opportunity to create jobs as well. And we've got to do that in a fashion that's got a systematic regulatory process to it. But that's just one thing. We can look at sports betting, for example, and expanding gaming in the state. Those are things that might bring near-term revenue to the coffers of the state. But like I said, we're going to look at everything, because balancing the budget is critically important if we're going to address the real challenges that we've got.
As was the case throughout the race for governor, Pritzker also declined to elaborate on that graduated income tax plan. He also declined to say when he will introduce a proposal.
We've got to work with the legislature and listen to people, because we've got to get 60% of the House and the Senate to support a constitutional amendment, and then 60% of the people of the state to vote for it. And so in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that all the ideas are incorporated here, including those of Republicans. They may disagree, some of them, with a graduated income tax, but they may also have opinions about what rates would work best if we actually had one. And I want to make sure that we're enhancing our ability to attract businesses to the state, and that we're keeping businesses here, and also our small businesses, and giving them a shot at growing. And so we've got to make sure that we're doing all of those things at once when we're contemplating a fair tax system. One more thing, we have the most unfair income tax system in the entire country. We also have, on top of that, property taxes that are driving people out of the state. So we can together make sure that we lower property taxes while we're putting this fair tax system in place.
So those are some of his thoughts on the taxation side of things. How about on the spending equation?
Pritzker made a lot of promises on the campaign trail. He talked about expanding health care, investing more money in schools, and in Illinois' crumbling roads and bridges. He says infrastructure will be a priority.
It's been a long time since we put money into our roads and bridges and waterways, and frankly, we need another infrastructure project too, which is building out broadband internet everywhere in the state. And so we want to get at the issue of an infrastructure bill nearly right away in our administration. I mean, we're going to have to work together to get it done, and I want to talk across the aisle with Republicans and Democrats to get it done.
But again, little detail on how that expensive program could be paid for. One idea has been to raise the tax on gasoline. Pritzker didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either.
Look, today we're going to look at all the opportunities that we have to make sure that we get an infrastructure bill in place. I would just tell you that there are lots of different ways in which to address this. One of them was put forward by Senator Bill Brady, and that's an expansion of the gaming bill in the state to make sure that we're bringing in new revenues.
So not closing the door to a gas tax increase, but not saying yes to it either.
Yeah, I'm just looking at how we can get an infrastructure bill done in the near term.
Amanda, House Speaker Michael Madigan seemed to be as much a part of the governor's campaign as either Rauner or Pritzker. What did he say about Mike Madigan?
Not much. He said he did speak with Madigan, just as he did with each of the other legislative leaders on both sides of the aisle.
And they were really the same conversations, which is we've got to work together. We've got to end the partisan rancor. We've got to work on the really big things that are affecting working families across the state and put our state and Springfield back on the side of working families.
So he has a couple of months before he's inaugurated. What can we expect from him between now and then? He's already getting started. He has formed a transition team that will be chaired by Juliana Stratton, who is poised to be the nation's first African-American lieutenant governor.
JB and I have always prioritized making sure that we have an inclusive and diverse administration. That's what we'll be working on, not just with racial, ethnic, and gender diversity, but also regional diversity. We look forward to our administration representing the people of the state of Illinois.
And one of the co-chairs of that transition team is former Illinois Governor Jim Edgar, a Republican.
Amanda, thank you very much. And now to Carol Marine and a deeper look at the election results and what they may mean. Carol.
Phil, thank you. Last night, a blue wave swept the state, if not the nation, while Democrat J.B. Pritzker easily defeated incumbent Republican Governor Bruce Rauner in Illinois. Democratic candidates elsewhere fell short in high-profile races in Georgia, Florida, and Texas. The president says the elections were a, quote, great victory for him. But with Democrats seizing control of the House, the bottom line is that for the first time, President Trump may face a check on his power. Joining us now to share their thoughts on election results here and around the country, Shia Kappas. She is a reporter for Politico and author of Politico's Illinois Playbook. Jim Warren, executive editor of NewsGuard and a contributing editor at U.S. News and World Report. Laurel Harbridge-Young, she's a political science professor at Northwestern University, where her research focuses on partisan conflict in American politics. And Joel Weissman, political analyst who wrapped up 40 years hosting Chicago Tonight, the Week in Review in January. Welcome back, all of you. So, Shia, let's start with you. And I don't mean to be glib about this, but is there a Republican Party in Illinois as of today?
There is. They're clinging on. Yes, there is. They're trying to figure out who they are and what the next chapter is for them. That means rethinking how they appeal to voters. They realize voters are younger and they're women, and the Republican message needs to appeal to that. So there's talk about changing the brand and needing to do it. They're going to try for 2020, but most likely you won't see a transition until 2022.
But to this moment, I mean, you saw the chairman of the Cook County Republican Party lose out in his county commissioner role. Art Jones, a neo-Nazi, got 53,000 votes in Dan Lipinski's 3rd Congressional District, flying under the GOP flag. And Jim, if messaging is what they're looking at, for the last 6 years, Speaker Madigan has had $100 million of Bruce Rauner's money targeting him as the worst thing that ever existed in Illinois, and it only made Madigan stronger.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. You know, I think you just have to look at the Chicago suburbs and see what the real challenge is. And, you know, Peter Roskam knew that he was probably going to lose. It was one reason he made sure to stay way, way, way away from Donald Trump, despite the fact, of course, today Trump goes after Peter Roskam by name and says, oh, you know, it was his mistake not to have me. No, it wasn't a mistake. Hultgren's a little different. That was a real dramatic surprise. And driving it all in some ways were white, female, well-educated voters who are increasingly the driving force in the Democratic Party nationally. Now, are they inescapably Democratic? Is there a way that the Republican Party in Illinois can get them? I think perhaps in sort of tailoring some economic message. But right now, that's their problem, and Trump is only exacerbating it, even though, I have to stipulate, there were some victories in other parts of the state.
Indeed there were, but Laurel, the other force that seemed to be at work in this election, both in Illinois and nationally, were millennials.
Yes.
It seemed like there was an awakening that we had not previously seen. What explains it?
So I think we have a couple of things. So one is, as you alluded to, much higher youth turnout. So the early voting rates among youth were in the, 100%, I think 122% increase here in Illinois. In some states, over 1,000% increase relative to the previous midterm elections. And you also had a shift compared to 2016 in the actual vote, so a more democratic vote share among younger voters. And I think that, that is driven in part by this kind of anger and frustration at the Trump administration, I think was encouraged by the mobilization that the Democrats have been doing ever since the Trump election. So the Women's March, the March for Science, all of these other kind of mobilization efforts that have gotten young people involved. And then I think also, universities and other groups I think are doing more to try to encourage students. I know the Big Ten had a competition among their students to see how many would get registered and turn out to vote.
Joel, this whole mobilization of women seemed to really hit DuPage County in what seemed to me like almost a massacre of Republicans there. And DuPage used to be the bastion.
Yeah, it used to be the strongest Republican county, obviously, in Illinois, and actually in the whole country. But, gradually it's been getting more and more Democratic, and this, of course, just made it explode. Actually, Hillary Clinton had done pretty well out there before, and I think the millennials and I think women felt that in some ways it was their fault that Trump got into office. The millennials for not participating, the women, the Republican ones particularly, thinking that maybe they made a mistake, the better educated ones, by staying with the Republican Party, and this time it flipped.
So let's go back to Illinois a little bit here, because now you don't need a Republican to pass a bill. Isn't that correct?
Right.
That's right.
So you don't need a Republican there's none in statewide office. Democrats dominate the House, Democrats dominate the Senate. How much bipartisanship are we likely to see?
I would say none. It's certainly not required. And I think rather than have the Democrats fighting the Republicans, you may see eventually outwardly and certainly internally Pritzker fighting Madigan. The last two Democratic governors, Quinn and Blagojevich, did not get along with Madigan. I don't know how Pritzker is going to do it because he doesn't have as much experience as those two had. And the only thing he has going for him is that Madigan always had the power of the purse to keep his people in line. Pritzker can match that purse. So if he gets some of these Democrats off the reservation and go with him and perhaps join with Republicans, he can compensate them perhaps in a grander way than Madigan could.
That's just a terrific point. I mean, that's the potential real threat of Pritzker, I think, to Madigan as an alternative source of funding for rank-and-file Democrats in the Democratic caucus. Pat Quinn had to sort of go and bend a knee all the time to, cut deals with Madigan. A lot of it had to do with money, but that changes the calculus, even though we have a rookie governor and political neophyte.
So bipartisanship, Laurel, is your real area of expertise, and everybody's talking about it in Washington. You just heard Governor-elect Pritzker talking about it with regard to Illinois. Are you particularly optimistic that we're going to see bipartisanship in this political culture?
So not particularly optimistic. I think there are challenges both with unified government here in Illinois, but also now the divided government that we're seeing at the national level. So on the one hand, in unified government here and large majorities, as we just said, there's not a lot of incentive for the Democrats to work with Republicans. They don't need them to kind of pass critical veto players or something to get things done. And the Republicans may be unlikely to want to work with them because they want to point out how they're different. They want to regain power. On the other hand, at the national level, when we have a divided Congress with the House being controlled by one party and the Senate controlled by another, that's when both parties have the least incentive to care about governing, which might actually bring bipartisanship together, and the most incentive to care about messaging. Essentially end up with things like we had in 2011, where one chamber brings up a bill that they know will fail in the other chamber, and vice versa.
State finances, Shia, includes $7 billion in unpaid bills, $130 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, not even including Chicago and CPS, and I can go on and on and on. It's the short list. You heard J.B. Pritzker on this broadcast talking to Amanda. He's got a lot of big ideas, but where's the money?
I don't know. I'm interested in that committee that he's formed with the transition team. You have people who really understand money, like Michael Sachs on that committee, whose company understands pensions. So you wonder what kind of discussions are going on behind the scenes about how to tackle it.
But Jim, he's talking about marijuana licensing. No. That's chicken feed compared to
that. I mean, the gaming, the cannabis stuff. You've ultimately got to dramatically raise taxes, and he even set out the cautionary notes in his interview with you guys. At the time that everybody's property taxes are being raised, boy, I think Joe, if I remember, lived in the burbs. But if you live in the city, you're getting creamed in the next year. When people see those property tax bills, they're not going to be particularly happy with the notion of state income tax going up to 6% or so. So all this other stuff is hocus pocus. They're going to have to dramatically increase taxes.
So we expect some gridlock. We don't know where the revenue is coming from, Joel. And for the Illinois electorate, do you feel that now that this midterm is over, there's some sense of calm, some sense of certainty in where we're going?
Well, I think there is some comfort because Runner alienated almost every constituency almost from the moment he took the oath. And now I think people think at least state government will function. But the key is the money. And, Pritzker can talk all he wants about a graduated income tax, but that's going to be years away because you need a constitutional amendment. And the only alternative they have is to raise the flat income tax, and I think it's going to be done. Otherwise, these bills continue to remain unpaid, unless there's so much inflation that the extra revenues at these rates will provide for the extra debts.
Anything surprise you last night in either the Illinois or the national races, something you just weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the vivid underscoring of the rural-urban divide in this country, which is, I think, another reason that it exacerbates the even vague prospect of any bipartisanship. I mean, it's really interesting. Even, I counted today, there were 170 Republicans who won their congressional seats, but in all those 170, the Democrats picked up substantially from where they were 2 years ago. So there clearly was a blue wave. At the same time, as you noted in your intro, there were those governorships that the Republicans won. But if I'm Donald Trump, I best also be worried about 3 different states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, because there is no way in the world that he gets another 4 years without winning those 3, and those went Democratic.
Also Wisconsin and some other states. And I think Trump, he can declare victory all he wants, but his formula for winning the electoral vote, let alone the popular vote, is broken. And I don't know how he's going to put Humpty Dumpty together again unless the Democrats overplay their hands, particularly in Washington, with the power of investigating everything, and they look like complete obstructionists and overreaching.
And I would just add to that briefly that I think with this urban-rural divide, we saw essentially the part of the country that pushed back against the kind of Trump narrative and the way that he has governed his more populist nationalist message, and then the part of the country that has bought into that ever as much as they did in 2016. And I think that's where we really saw the kind of number of Democrats in the red states that lost, the gains, which is very rare in a midterm election for the president. And that's where I think the Kavanaugh situation ultimately became the worst of both worlds for Democrats. He ended up on the Supreme Court, and that became a rallying cry for Republicans in these areas. I know the Heidkamp race, something like 35% of voters said that that was an important factor.
Yamiche Alcindor in that news conference today got the president's ire by talking about nationalism. We're rolling into the next presidential election. Our immigration, nationalism, race, health care. Which of these rises to the highest occasion, do you think?
In Illinois, I think it's health care. I think that's what happened in Sean Casten's district and Lauren Underwood. Those are the issues that really drove the northern part of the state. Donald Trump going into the southern part of the state helped maybe appease everybody there, and that showed.
But there was a Trump personality too, which I think drove a lot of women more firmly into the Democratic camp. And it's also important to note, if you're the Democrats, that increasing numbers of well-educated white females are self-identifying as liberal Democrats at a faster rate than African Americans and Latinos. And I think you're absolutely right. Healthcare is important to them. But temperament is too, and what one saw for 90 minutes on display today was predictably extraordinary in how bellicose it was, the rhetorical savagery, the dismissiveness, and the sort of essentially alternate reality that was positive.
Followed by the resignation of Jeff Sessions.
And by his continued statement that everybody likes me, people like me. And the truth is, one of the other things in this election that was interesting was the power of the embrace in both parties. Like Oprah Winfrey coming to Georgia, arguably that didn't really help as much as Mike Pence going to Georgia, and Roscoe not inviting Trump. And like you said, I don't think that would have helped them one bit.
But I think on the health care front, just one really important thing here is this was the first election in which Democrats actually really embraced the Affordable Care Act. I don't know if that's something that they'll be able to do successfully in the next election, or if one of these other issues will become more important.
We're going to leave it there. Shia Campos, Jim Warren, Laurel Hubbard-Young, and Joel Weissman. Thank you all for being here on Chicago Tonight. More to come. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Inland Real Estate Group of Companies.
The Inland Real Estate Group of Companies is a national financial and commercial real estate group. Always building for tomorrow, Inland has conducted over $44 billion in commercial property transactions over the last 50 years. Inland owns, manages, finances, and invests in major retail shopping centers, apartments, large-scale construction projects, student housing, and medical office and healthcare facilities. The Inland Real Estate Group of Companies, Incorporated. Born in Chicago, at home in the world of commercial real estate since 1968. To learn more, visit inlandgroup.com.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, that other big race begins in earnest, a snapshot of the race for Chicago mayor. And some newly elected Democrats in Cook County talk about their plans for office. But first, the balance of power has shifted in the U.S. House of Representatives, with 26 seats so far flipping to Democratic control. The composition of the House will look a lot different, with more women and people of color winning last night, including right here in Illinois, with Democrat Lauren Underwood defeating Randy Hultgren in the 14th Congressional District.
This experience these past 16 months have done nothing but reaffirm my love for our country. A country where a story like mine is possible, where a regular middle-class woman working full-time is able to, with a friend, Sarah, I see you, love you, figure out how to get on the ballot, knock doors, get signatures, invite ourselves to political events and conversations. Thank you back to our very first at We Can Lead Change. Ladies, we built a website, we launched a campaign, and together we built a movement.
In another upset victory in the reliably Republican 6th Congressional District, once held by conservative stalwart Henry Hyde, political newcomer Sean Casten defeated 6th-term incumbent Peter Roskam by 6 points. Joining us now to talk about his victory is scientist, businessman, and now Congressman-elect Democrat Sean Casten. And thank you for joining us on Chicago tonight. What made the difference in your race?
1,000 tiny things, well, probably more appropriately about 3,000 tiny things, which was just an unbelievable amount of volunteer energy. The sheer number of people who were on the ground knocking doors. As I was mentioning at the start, I think we knocked 102,000 doors in the 3 days before the election. And humbling is not a big enough word to describe the feeling of what that volunteer energy is.
Aside from the boots on the ground that you just described, you made criticism of President Trump a big issue in your campaign. How much of your victory was about President Trump?
You know, I'll leave the political analyst to say what factor caused, because I don't know. I do think that look, I'm a former CEO. I spent 16 years running companies. My bio looks an awful lot like a traditional suburban Republican, right? My values look a lot like a traditional suburban Republican. And those values are so at odds with Donald Trump and what the Republican Party in Washington has become that me voicing that resonated with people, I suppose, but I was just being honest about what I saw in this world right now.
So what is at the top of your priority list? What are the issues that that people in your district tell you they want you to focus on?
Well, as your last panel said, healthcare is overwhelmingly the issue that if you ask people what really bothers them about where this is, people want to see the Affordable Care Act protected, defended, and expanded. What's happened to take away coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, to repeal the individual mandate, to defund the risk corridors. These have real impacts on real people. And people want to see that protected, and I hope with the leadership change in the House we can do that.
What do you see, looking at the House overall, not just your specific priorities, what do you see the role of the House being in the last half of the Trump presidency this term?
Well, I hope it fulfills the role that it's supposed to fulfill under the Constitution. It is a co-equal branch with an obligation to act as a check and balance on the executive. It's not done that for the last 2 years, and the purpose is not to be vindictive about it, but there are things that haven't happened. The fact that the House Intelligence Committee under Devin Nunes said there was nothing to find about 119 indictments ago says that it wasn't doing its job. Now, as against that, I think it's important for us to advance a positive agenda. I've spent my whole career profitably addressing greenhouse gas emissions. I would love nothing better than to spend the next 2 years lowering CO2 emissions and growing the economy. Can we get that done with the cooperation of the Senate and the White House? I hope so. But in the meantime, we do have to make sure that we're acting like a check.
Acting like a check, and yet you just alluded to it, and we heard it in the previous panel, and that has to do with the prospect of Democrats overplaying your hand. You'll have investigative powers, subpoena powers. Is there a danger that you might just overdo it?
Well,
you collectively, that is.
You're speaking to a complete political novice. So if you put me in charge of all the decisions and elect me to be Speaker, yeah, I could probably overdo it. I don't think I'm going to run for Speaker. But I think we're at a tricky time, right? Because we have a president who is violating all the norms of what we thought a president was normally allowed to do. And the fact that there's only one party that's really advocating for saying we are endowed with certain inalienable rights, we are all created equal, we do want to be the country that provides equal opportunity. And the fact that we're looking the other way at a president who isn't standing up for those rights has made it partisan to call that out, but it shouldn't be a partisan issue. And I think we need to have a conversation about how to have that conversation.
One of the things that you're going to be called upon to do when you're a member of Congress is make decisions about congressional leadership. Thoughts about that? Thoughts about Nancy Pelosi as being the next Speaker of the House? She got the president's endorsement today.
Well, you know, what I've said to everybody I've met in the leadership team is I've kind of prided myself on being an informed voter in all the elections I voted in the past, and I plan on continuing that tack. I don't know who is all on the ballot. So far, Nancy Pelosi has said she's running. I've not heard who else is running against her. But what I've said to her and other leaders is at the point when I've met all the people who are running and understand what their positions are, I'll make an informed vote. But to say that you're going to vote for someone before you know who they're running against, I think would be a little irresponsible.
What's your takeaway, big picture, from last night's results?
My big picture takeaway is being totally inspired by the moment that we're in. There are so many people, certainly in Illinois, but arguably nationwide, who got inspired 2 years ago to participate in the democratic process for the first time and carried it through. And, you know, I was going to events throughout the campaign season and saying, you know, everybody was angry and nervous about what was in the news cycle, and I'd say, I'm going to inspire you. Everybody in this room, raise your hand if you never got involved in politics before this cycle. And invariably, half or more of the hands in the room would go up. And whether that was people like me running for office for the first time, there's a lot of first-time candidates who won. Whether it was people canvassing, marching for our lives, marching for science, marching for women, phone banking, there was just this tremendous energy, and I hope that carries through because it's a beautiful thing to behold.
Sean Caston, thank you for joining us. Hope you come back to our show as the news of the day warrants.
Be my pleasure. Thank you.
And up next, looking ahead to the next election.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Just what everyone wants to talk about, a heated political race. Like it or not, another one is in full swing. This, the contest for Chicago mayor. Last night, Susana Mendoza won election to a new term as the state's comptroller, but will she now enter the mayor's sweepstakes? She has a short time to figure that out, and Paris Schutz has the latest. Paris.
Phil, to your question, all signs are pointing toward yes. And as you remember, Susana Mendoza made the declaration on this show that she would stay as comptroller if Bruce Rauner won. Well, we all know what happened last night, and Susana Mendoza herself won her race against Darlene Singer to become the comptroller of Illinois for a second full term, or for a first full term after a partial term. And so the initial rumor mill had it that she would announce her run for mayor tomorrow. But last week, a pre-shot Mendoza for Mayor campaign ad leaked out to the media. So now it seems like that might have set her back a little bit, and she is not going to announce tomorrow, that we know. But campaign volunteers have been petitioning for weeks to get her name on the ballot. I asked another declared candidate for mayor, Toni Preckwinkle, who also ran and won re-election as Cook County Board President last night, what she thought of a Mendoza candidacy.
Well, this is a democracy, and anyone's entitled to run.
And is there any sense that, you know, you've been in this race, you were very open about the fact that you were running for county board, but also running for mayor, and she kind of took a different approach. Is that a problem with you?
She's entitled to make her own choices.
And Paris, at this moment, where does the field stand? Remind us.
Allow me to take a very deep breath, Phil, and let's put that graphic that we have. There they are. There's Dorothy Brown, Gary Chico, Bill Daley, Amara Enya, Jamal Green, William Kelly, John Kozler, Troy LaRaviere, Lori Lightfoot, Gary McCarthy, Toni Preckwinkle, Neil Salas-Griffin, Paul Valls, Doc Walls, Willie Wilson, and there are more even lesser-known candidates that we haven't even We don't have room to fit into that screen, Phil. And then tomorrow, there will be an announcement from LaShawn Ford. He's a state representative from the West Side. He has announced his intentions to get in the race. And it is in full swing right now. Key dates are coming up. Starting November 19th, candidates can start turning in their nominating petitions, and then they have a week to do so before they're cut off on the 26th of November. That's the deadline. The primary election is February 26th of 2019, and then the runoff will be April 2nd of 2019. And the top fundraisers so far have been Bill Daley at about $1.3 million, Gary Chico also over $1 million, Lori Lightfoot running at around $400,000, and both Vallis and Prenkwinkle a little under $400,000. Meanwhile, if the current mayor, Rahm Emanuel, has a favorite in this race, he's not letting that cat out of the bag just yet.
I know we have a tradition in Chicago where people try to pick successors. So I'm not doing that. I think it's up to the voters to decide who's the right candidates and who has the right ideas.
Ditto on that for the newly elected governor.
My intention is to work with whoever the new mayor of the city of Chicago is. That isn't something that happened in the last administration, and I really think it's important for a governor to work with the mayor of the largest city in our state and one of the big economic engines of the state.
If and when Mendoza does get in the race, she does have around $2 million in her campaign war chest from the comptroller's race that she can transfer to this. And if she wins the mayor's race, then the governor will have to announce a special election for her replacement.
Paris, thank you. And up next, some of the winners in Cook County elections. A blue wave crashed hard on Cook County races last night. Democrats were elected to 2 Republican-held seats on the Cook County Board of Commissioners. And on the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, one candidate won election after a long, strange trip to even secure a spot on the ballot. How might these newly elected Democrats tip the scales in Cook County? Joining us to share their plans for office are Scott Britton, Commissioner-elect of Cook County's 14th District, which covers northern and northwestern suburbs, including all or part of Northbrook, Wheeling, and Palatine. Kevin Morrison, Commissioner-elect of Cook County's 15th District, which covers northwestern suburbs, including all or part of Elk Grove Village, Schaumburg, and Barrington. And Cameron Davis, Commissioner-elect of the Board of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And gentlemen, welcome to Chicago tonight.
Thank you.
Scott Britton, only 2 Republicans are left on the Cook County Board. What do you say to people who might be concerned that there is a lack of balance on the board and not enough loyal opposition to put the brakes on potential excesses?
Well, I think all of us have made it abundantly clear that we're independent, and we're going to be independent when we need to be if there's an issue on the board. You know, from my own experience, you know, I belong to a political party in Glenview, and I've served for 12 years as a trustee. We have one party there. It's one-party rule in Glenview, and I've bucked the party trends whenever I've needed to do so, and I've been independent when I've needed to do it, and I'll continue to do that on the Cook County Board as we go forward.
Kevin Morrison, your response to that concern?
Yeah, so I've been running from the very beginning of this campaign to be a voice for the residents of the 15th District. That's why throughout the past year we focused on meeting as many constituents as possible. I knocked over 20,000 doors. Our team of volunteers in 3 months alone knocked 50,000 doors. And you know, it's those voices that matter, and those are the families and people I'm going to be representing on the county board.
Cameron Davis, you've taken an unusual path to your position. For people who maybe were not following your election as some of us have been, quickly summarize what you had to go through.
Sure. Well, first of all, Phil, the vacancy opened up because of the death of a previous commissioner, and because of that timing of that death, the way to get on the ballot in November was through a write-in campaign. So first step, write-in. The second big step then, after winning in the primary, was having to go through a court battle to get the seat. And then the third, of course, was actually winning on yesterday. So
Remind people what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District does.
It's a tremendously important agency, $1.2 billion per year budget, and it is in charge of helping us live our lives by making sure that we have reduced flooding, that the water that we use is cleaned and returned safely to our rivers and to our lakes. And waterways around the region. So from a public health perspective, it rarely gets more important than that. And the other thing that people don't realize is here in the region, our commissioners are elected. A lot of places around the country they're appointed. So we should have the choice as to who represents us on that board.
Kevin Morrison, what are your priorities going to be once you take office?
So first and foremost, I want to make sure we're expanding affordable healthcare access in the northwest suburbs. There's a stat that I'm hard set on changing, that the Cook County Jail is the largest provider of mental health in the United States of America. That needs to change, but I want to make sure we're pushing policies on the county board that uplift middle-class families, that once and for all fix this broken property tax system, and then make sure that we're increasing job opportunities in the northwest suburbs.
And Scott Britton, your priorities, what did your constituents tell you?
A lot of people are talking again about healthcare issues, and I think that, as Kevin has indicated, there's a lot more that we can do within the county system. But the independent board that now runs the healthcare system has done a wonderful job, and now people are choosing to go to Cook County, whereas before you did that because you had no other option. So I think that's been great, and we can improve on that. My ideas are more related to additional revenue sources without raising property taxes or the sales tax. Well, I think you can begin a public-private partnership, which we have not really done, in the forest preserve system, which is very underfunded, particularly in its pensions. So my proposal is that we go, particularly in my district, which has a lot of large employers, adopt a forest preserve. You would then have your people go, clear brush, and then also give money, and you can use that in your advertising, indicating that you're a good corporate citizen. I think that would help a lot. We can also do some more things with, within the state structure, if they can change the income tax, and then there's going to be a potential cannabis tax and anything else that can come out. There are new revenue sources we can tap.
Kevin Morrison, the county's budget has been tight for some time. As people know, County Board President Preckwinkle proposed a soda tax. She backed off on that, but a lot of tax experts say that was actually the right thing to do. Your reaction to the prospect of taxes along those lines?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of regressive taxes. I was against the soda pop tax from the very beginning.
For that reason?
It really hurt our small business community. My family has an Italian restaurant, for example, and it definitely hurt our business and what we were able to bring in. What I would like to see are policies on the county and local level that make it more affordable for small business development. Every new small business we could create with policies like that are brand new streams of revenue to the county, state, and municipality. I want to see policies like that that will generate new forms of revenue to make sure that we can afford our vital services for the county.
Cameron Davis, you worked as an environmental policy expert with the Obama administration. What are some of the environmental issues that concern you and that you feel you're in a position to affect?
Yeah, there are a lot of them, and I try to look at these issues through a public health lens because the environment and public health are so intertwined. But we have a lot of aging infrastructure. In an era of climate change where we're getting more intense rainstorms, we need to make sure that our infrastructure is keeping up and staying up to the task. Another one is making sure that we're being equitable. A lot of our communities, we have a lot of vulnerable communities to flooding that need high priority attention. Making sure water quality is what it should be. We also have Asian carp threats as well that come to the Great Lakes.
Is that all within your jurisdiction? I mean, when many people think of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, they think of deep tunnel and nothing else.
Sure.
Do you have the jurisdiction or the ability to impact policies beyond that?
We have, at the Water Reclamation District, there's expertise that I think can be brought to bear to help with solutions on the Asian carp issue. All of these things are intertwined, though, in terms of making the region's quality of life as high and as strong as it can possibly be. And the fact that people are paying attention to the Water Reclamation District now so much is a great sign.
One of the things that people are concerned about, getting back to the issue of taxation, is property taxes. Scott Britton, can people expect more property tax increases in the immediate future?
Well, the county is one of the few places that has not increased the property tax. In fact, the levy has stayed exactly the same since the mid-90s. That's one problem that I think has to be addressed at some point. There are institutional problems within the budget, particularly as it relates to pensions, and if you're not going to increase the revenue, you're not going to be able to match the increase in the costs. So at some point, I think not this year and probably not next year, but certainly within the next 4 years, we have to look at least at potentially reducing income taxes, as J.B. Pritzker has announced he wants to do, and perhaps slightly increase the levy, which would help meet our burden on the budget.
Kevin Morrison, just real quickly, do you feel that you were part of a blue wave last night?
Well, I would say we were part of a rainbow wave. We made history last night. I last night became the first openly LGBT county board commissioner, as well as the youngest. You know, there was definitely some great strides we made in electing millennials to office throughout the nation, but also new LGBT members of both Congress, and now we have one on the county board. Also, at the same time, knocking out the chair of the GOP. It was a fun race.
Cameron Davis, part of the blue wave last night?
Yeah, I really see, when I've talked to people, so many people really turning out because they care about water. It's an issue that unifies all of us, no matter what your gender, what your age, race, religious beliefs. I think that's what really, what we saw as a signal with this election.
Scott Britton, Kevin Morrison, Cameron Davis, thank you all for being here. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing and join us tomorrow night live at 7. Renowned New York architect Robert A.M. Stern on his first major building in Chicago. And a realistic look at what CBD oil, which is a marijuana extract, can do to help manage pain and more. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.